Hello, this is Jason again for what I believe is the fourth talk regarding the topic of de-spiritualization. Last time I gave a little more information about things we happen to intuit, and I think I looked at some science fiction, looking at Brave New World and other well-known science fiction stories that show that um, in the future, with more scientific knowledge, man still has some of the same problems. And one of the implications of that could be that science doesn't address all of man's problems because not all of man's problems are physical. And while science does a wonderful job of addressing the physical, it cannot address the spiritual. And so I said that next time I would talk about some of the limitations of science. So that's what I'm going to do. So I want to make it clear once again, I'm not anti-science. Science is our way of understanding the physical world. And it's done a lot, especially in medical science and mankind and humankind. While we do have a spirit, we certainly have a body. And so science has come in very useful in helping increase our longevity and our enjoyment of life because we are physical. Besides having a spirit, we are definitely physical. On that, everyone agrees. And science has done a wonderful job dealing with the study of our physical bodies and bodies that are little tiny bodies that are fighting against our bodies and so forth, and addressing those things through scientific method and research. But if we do indeed have a spirit, that is the first limitation of science, is that it cannot address the spiritual. And if we continue to address only the physical and not the spiritual, we'll more and more we'll see that limitation. And this is what I pointed out is often seen in science fiction, that there always seems to be this shortcoming that science can't solve our problems because they're not merely physical. But here's another thing that I guess you'd call it a shortcoming. It's not really a shortcoming necessarily, but it's just a fact. And that is that science is not good. Okay? And when I say good, I mean it's not good, it's neither good nor evil. It is power. It is knowledge, or it leads to knowledge at least. We can talk about science either if we talk about science as a method, that's fine. We can describe science as our method of understanding things. But of course, the scientific method would lead to scientific knowledge or physical universe knowledge or physical knowledge in general. But of course, knowledge is not a good thing. People will often say knowledge is a good thing, but of course it's not morally good. It's just knowledge. We like to say knowledge is power, and knowledge is power. But of course, we also know that power is not good. Power is just power. It all depends on how you use it, right? In fact, we've noticed from human nature that power tends to corrupt. We even have a famous quote that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So if you just take these famous quotes, knowledge is power, power corrupts, we know that knowledge can corrupt because knowledge is a power and it all depends on how we use it. And we see this in our history. Scientific knowledge has been used to do a lot of dangerous or life-taking things. I'm going to take a little tangent to this because it's something that kind of bothers me sometimes. Every so often you'll get into these arguments about science versus religion, and there shouldn't be a science versus religion argument, actually. I mean, my whole point here is that the spirit shouldn't be ignored. Doesn't mean I want the body and science to be ignored. Absolutely not. Science should keep doing what it does, studying the physical world and offering physical solutions to physical problems. It should do that for the remainder of our existence. But sometimes there are discussions like that, and one thing you may have come across many times I have is this idea that Religion is terrible and it's responsible for all the wars that ever existed and blah blah. Um, One, of course, that's just simply not true, not even close to true. But two, even if religion was responsible for some terrible things, if people were manipulated through religious teachings and religious fervor, and it sent them into wars to reclaim, land for the Crusades or to do whatever, it wouldn't mean that religion itself is bad. It would just mean that it was used incorrectly. And the same people that make this argument, for some reason, give science a free pass, despite the fact that in every war, especially in recent wars, one of the biggest killers of people were things that were created through science, right? I mean, Agent Orange was not made in a monastery by Benedictine monks, right? It was made by scientists. Napalm, mustard gas, nuclear weapons dropped on civilians were created by scientists, all right? So all the killing machines, all the great killing machines, all the weapons of mass destruction, right, are the result of scientific experimentation, using the scientific method, understanding the physical world, and taking that information and creating something to kill people, right? Or to defoliate, right, trees so that we can kill people more easily, and so on. So the idea that somehow let's all get mad at religion because look at all these wars it caused, but they don't say, well, let's get mad at science because look at all these weapons of mass destruction they created. And that's because we know we should have the same view. Neither science nor religion are necessarily good or bad. It depends on how they're used. So that's one of the weaknesses of science. I shouldn't say a weakness. It's not really a weakness. It's just a fact. It is not good. It is simply powerful. And it will always depend on how it's used. And that brings back the whole spiritual concept of right and wrong. The idea that there is such a thing as good and bad. And we talked about how in science fiction we often see these are the two problems that we often see with when we have science fiction stories about the future. Either one, as I said, the sciences might work out pretty well, but the problem is people are still people. They're still envious. They're still competitive. They still become tribalistic, and they still have us versus them mentality. And no matter how advanced the science is, no matter how advanced their medicines and their cities and all that kind of stuff, there's still something in here that science doesn't really address. And so it doesn't fix that problem. Or two, the other problem is science works too well. It does treat people like they're just physical beings, and it almost makes them like they're just physical beings. And we can see that they're missing something. And we see a society where people don't seem like people. Yes, the wars are over. Things are good. People are content and subdued and all this kind of stuff. But they seem soulless. That's the word we would use. It's like a soulless society, and it's harrowing because we don't expect that from people. We expect people to be more than just physical beings all getting along. There's a spirit which creates the potential for good and evil. The free will is there. The idea that we can choose freely and that it matters what we choose. Okay, so science fiction shows how science comes up short in those two different ways. Either it doesn't fix the problem, or it fixes it, but it's worse. the cure is worse than the disease. Anyway, I just wanted to point out that all these weapons of mass destruction is an example of science being used not to help people, but to harm people. And that's because science isn't good. It's just a power that can be used to do good things, or a power used to do bad things, right? So, and then there's also a gray area with science. We can use our knowledge of nuclear energy to create clean energy or to create weapons of mass destruction and drop them on civilians. Both are possible and both have been done. But also, there are times when science is intending to do something good, but there's a lot of side effects, right? That's another weakness, isn't it? When's the last time you saw an advertisement for a medicine on TV and it ended with, oh, and by the way, there are no side effects with this medication? I can't remember the last time I saw that. There's almost always a list as long as your arm. Now, this is not to bash medicine. If you find a medicine that works for you, by all means, use it. But it does show that science has its limitations. It doesn't always fix things, even when it's trying to fix things. First of all, it's not always, people aren't always using it to fix things. Sometimes they're using it to hurt people. But even when people are trying to do good things, there can be side effects. The Industrial Revolution was not intended to pollute the planet, but that's what happened. We were asking scientists, how can we put an end to climate change and to clean up the planet? But let's not forget, it was scientific discoveries and the implementation of science, applied sciences, that led to all the pollution. I mean, the weed killers and the pesticides that we use that were meant to do good things have had a negative effect. We've got microplastics. We've got all these pollutants, the decrease in the ozone layer. All these things that have led to the pollution of the planet were scientific advancements at the time. And this is just something we see. So that's the other limitation of science, is it doesn't always see what it's doing. It has a goal, it goes towards that goal, but it doesn't always notice the collateral damage that it causes until after it happens. So that's just another limitation of science. And again, as I mentioned, I don't want science to stop doing what it does. It is our way to understand the physical world. But one, it's limited in that we don't always fully understand what it's going to accomplish. That's the gray area. But more importantly, we know that science can be used to control people or harm people, and it has been for a long time. Because it's not good in and of itself. It's just a power that people use. And that brings us back to the idea of right and wrong, and who's using it, and why are they using it. The idea of a spirit that's accountable for its actions. And to quote another science fiction movie, if you consider this science fiction, maybe you won't, maybe you'll consider it more like adventure, but the most famous line in Jurassic Park, other than hold on to your butts, is probably when Jeff Goldblum scolds these people who have developed these dinosaurs by saying, yeah, you guys were so busy asking yourselves if you could do it, you never bothered to ask if you should do it. These two words are so powerful. Could and can are all about power. Like I just said, science is knowledge, knowledge is power. Can we do it? That's a power question. It doesn't ask if it's right or wrong, it just asks, can we? It's focused on power. But should we is focused on morality. It's focused on whether it's good or bad, whether it's right or wrong. And his point was, that can happen. That's why power can corrupt, is it starts to focus on what can we do rather than what should we do. And that's, again, where science can fail us, in that we still have to be moral about it, don't we? If it's a powerful thing, we have to be moral. So I just want to mention the couple limitations of science. One is, as we've been pointing out, while it very well addresses the physical aspect of man, it does not address the spiritual aspect of man. And two, because it is not a good thing in and of itself, it's just a powerful thing, it all depends on who is wielding that power and why. What is their purpose? So we still have to get back to the more basic questions of who are we and what is it we're trying to do? What is it we're here for? What is good and bad? What is right and wrong? And science isn't as helpful with those questions, quite frankly, because they seem to be spiritual, not physical. All right, that's all for today, and I'll see you next time.